I have lost trust in city government. It's definitely a much worse opportunity than it used to be. California is like Shangri-La for property owners. What broke it is COVID.
The eviction moratorium has expired. There is still a rent freeze in effect.
Predicting pro forma rents is the single most important skill in investing.
You're very good at predicting and understanding where rents are going to be.
The way I've come to think about business is like it's a game.
Welcome to No Vacancy, where I share conversations with LA's top multifamily owners, investors, and visionaries. I'm your host, Taylor Avakian, the founder of the group CRE, and I specialize in the sale of apartment buildings in Los Angeles. On this show, we cut straight to what matters, market insights and real-world strategies straight from LA's multifamily icons to help you navigate one of the most complex real estate markets in the world, Southern California. Enjoy. Moses, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Of course, to get to speak with you today. And I think over the last, maybe 5-6 years we've communicated, and first initially on Twitter and maybe a couple of voicemail cold calls to you in the beginning.
Yep.
And now we've been able to get together on this podcast, and we're yet to do a deal, but I feel like in the future.
Someday, man. We can get into it, but we tend to buy from much less sophisticated brokers than you are.
Yeah, and that makes it very hard too, because from the deals of what are the best deals, and we'll get into that later too, is like the off market or an unsophisticated broker who is not as familiar with the current landscape, doesn't know the buyers, doesn't know where rents are.
Totally.
And I think that's where one of your biggest strong suits is, coming from the property management side of things and the leasing side. You're very good at predicting and understanding where market rents are going to be, which I would say is like 50 to 70% of what's going to make a deal work in most areas. Los Angeles is a place where it's completely different.
Well, I mean, I actually things are a little different now, but I would say that accurately predicting pro forma rents is the single most important skill probably in investing in apartments, at least the way that we do it, because you can, given all the other inputs, whatever purchase price, construction costs, whatever, you can make a deal look great by being, $200 over a month per unit, or you can convince yourself to buy something you shouldn't. And obviously, the other alternative is you end up like you guess low by $200 and you don't buy the stuff you should have bought. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually always been an obsession of mine. And to this day, I mean, we have a management portfolio where we manage 1,100 units, 400 that we own, and then 700 that we manage for third-party owners. And there are a few of our customers who prefer to set rents for themselves, but for almost that entire portfolio, I set the rents personally, both for the asking rents and for renewals.
And is that where you just don't trust anyone else, or you feel like that's your special superpower?
There's a couple of things going on. One is the most important reason is that I believe that I am better positioned than anyone else in the company to understand the trade-offs of rent versus occupancy on a building-by-building basis. So, I mean, obviously, great neighborhood, great building, tons of demand. You're probably willing to push it a little bit and risk the vacancy. Yeah. And on the other end of the spectrum, probably not. Mm-hmm. But other things come into play too. Like, for example, a building, we manage a lot of small buildings. And
like, so small, when you say small, what do you
I
mean?
think the average the average building size is like 8 to 9 units.
Okay. Yeah.
So we had like 140 tiny buildings. And so you can easily get into these situations where an owner has had a bunch of vacancy on one unit or a couple of units up to now. Maybe you got them filled and now you have another vacancy coming. And I feel like I'm best positioned. I mean, obviously the owner himself or herself, but they're paying us to do it. So in our organization, I'm best positioned to understand, okay, this guy has had a bunch of vacancy already this year. Like maybe let's not push it on this next rent to try to get the unit full. So that's why I set all of the pricing. But a positive externality, let's say, of setting all the pricing is that I have a very granular view on what prices can be for all different types of units, but primarily for renovated ones in the neighborhoods in which we do business. And of course, we have always filtered that information back into our acquisition process.
And so, because you obviously, like you said, you have very small niche mom and pop, I would say, size buildings, but Los Angeles is primarily mom and pop, small base buildings. That's the majority of the units.
Yeah, they're small buildings. And I should say, I mean, we recently signed up to manage an 85 unit building.
Wow.
So we're definitely, we have I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but we have got renovated 110 buildings in Los Angeles since 2008. And among other things, what you learn from doing that is you learn that there's a special set of skills that are involved in taking a building from 0 occupancy up to 100 after it's been built or renovated. And so we're very good at that. And so increasingly we are being asked by developers of new buildings to come in and do that lease up process and then manage. So I think we will ultimately end up managing larger and larger buildings. But yeah, for sure, the legacy portfolio is small ones. And the reason is, and as we were talking about before, with our acquisition process, we were always, when we're doing these rehab deals, we were ruthless about sticking to very high unlevered yield on cost targets. Okay. And we can talk about why. But the result of that was the large buildings tend to be owned by sophisticated owners who hire sophisticated brokers who hold sophisticated sale processes and extract maximum price. And so there's no alpha. There's no extra yield you can get there. The game that we were playing for a very long time was buying these much smaller buildings that were owned by mom and pops who had completely mismanaged them in many cases, who hired like some condo broker from Reseda, no offense to Reseda, who I don't even know if they have condos. I've been saying that for years. I don't know if they have condos in Reseda.
It works.
Some condo broker from Reseda because it's like, their friend's cousin or whatever. And that person doesn't have a buyer's list, right? So they just slap it up on the, they don't know how to price it. They come up with some crazy price. They slap it up on the MLS because they don't know who to call. And our business for a very, very long time was basically just picking off those mispriced assets because that's where the excess yield was coming from.
Why do you think LA is such a sporadic market when it comes to agents? Like, because in a perfect world, right? If people were logical, they would work with the best agent who had the biggest buyers list, who did the most amount of deals, and like logically that would make the most sense.
Yeah.
Why do you think LA is such a relationship driven / almost like this 1,000,001 different agents and people?
I think there's two different things going on at least. Well, one is, and probably most importantly, like these are, for the people who own them, these are like very large assets, right? And so there is a large amount of trust that's involved in hiring someone. And so when confronted with the choice between like your brother's best friend from growing up, let's say, or some stranger who by all accounts is an active broker, but like you'd have never met this person before, it's kind of understandable that people would choose that some portion of sellers would choose the person who they like trust because of that connection. Another thing, and it's so obvious to me that at various times I've like come reasonably close to trying to turn this into a business, is that the data about who the best brokers are is not available to regular people. And so
it's not even available to us, really.
Well, I mean, but for me, like when I'm thinking about who to sell a building, I'm like, particularly on a small building, it's like, I'm going to go on the MLS. I'm going to figure out the geographical area. I'm going to search for transactions over the last couple of years for this size building and look at who's the most actively selling these things. And I'm like, that person probably knows who the buyers are, right? But I have access to that information because I'm a broker and I know how to use the MLS.
Yeah.
You could do the same thing on CoStar for larger buildings. But like that information is just not available to a regular consumer. And so how do they even know that they're supposed to call broker X if they have a building that's that guy's specialty or that woman's specialty?
And I think a lot of brokers, it's like Rate My Professor, except without the tenure, where it would be like a true, I don't think brokers would like that very much, to be having an open book of like, hey, you haven't sold anything over here. You haven't performed. You don't have the track record, right? When everyone knows, there's the brokers out there who say one thing and the reality is another.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, and I toyed around with making a website to do this. And obviously you'd have to take for houses and small apartment buildings, you'd have to get the information from the MLS.
Yeah.
It's actually an open question whether the MLS would allow you to use the data in that way for the reason that you just gave. But it is, I mean, it's in my opinion, it is absolutely crazy. If you're, it's good to buy from brokers who.
It's great as an investor, right?
Yeah. From an investor, as an investor, you want to buy from people who don't know what they're doing. But when it comes to selling, you for sure want to pick the person who is most active or one of the people who is most active. Because again, they'll know who the buyers are.
And you're very well known for having a blog, and we're kind of one of the first people in that space to create this almost real estate community, I would say. And very early, 2013, 2012, when you started that?
Yeah, roughly.
So, early on, I remember seeing either a tweet or a LinkedIn post or something from you about how you built that business, because I know that you basically worked. In the meantime, when you and your brother were doing the initial businesses, you guys were making money to stay alive through leasing and doing actually brokerage stuff, right?
Yeah, early on. This is actually after I stopped working with my brother. Working with my partner. This is in 2012. We were we had just started Adaptive. We had we could raise a tiny amount of money.
Yeah.
And not enough to like feed us and whatever. So. We did a number of things. We did a bunch of buy-side brokerage and actually built a fairly active little brokerage primarily.
Which is hard and difficult, especially when you have exclusivity.
Yeah, I'll tell you more about it if you're interested, but it was a kind of an interesting niche. I'm not sure if it's possible to build that business anymore given the changes in the recent settlement. So we did a lot of buy-side brokerage. That led into a lot of what I now would describe as fee development, which was I would find a deal for someone to buy. I'd be like, well, you should buy this building, and what you need to do is renovate this unit and this unit, and you need to fix it, blah, blah. But if you do, the yield's going to be this. And the person would be like, dude, like, I'm a dentist. Like, what are you, obviously I'm not going to do that. And I was like, well, what if my partner who is a GC, what if he does the renovation and you pay him, or he oversees, not does the renovation, but what if he designs and oversees the renovation? Mm-hmm. We'd still hire a GC.
Yeah.
Would you pay him a consulting fee? And people were like, yeah, that makes sense. And so eventually, very quickly, with the idea, my partner and I were like, okay, look, we'll just, we'll pool the buy-side brokerage commission and that consulting fee. And that effectively became like then we were managing our own stuff. So we were like, okay, well, these buildings, as we finish renovating them, should just go into our management company. So the buy-side brokerage, the fee development, and actually eventually our business of like raising money from LPs and buying our own deals all kind of fed into the property management business.
So it's like this vertically integrated flywheel that compounded, and you looked up and 5 years later, you guys had a big management portfolio.
Yeah, but I mean, I should say like that sounds much more like rational and strategic than what was really going on. What was really going on is like I had a young family and there were no jobs at least no jobs that were willing to pay me as much as I would have needed to get paid to go work for someone else.
Yeah.
And I had the ability to monetize the knowledge that I had in various ways, like buy-side brokerage and I would go wherever. And so I was just like, I need to feed my family, like, rah, 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 sort of like trying to just generate opportunities and Pac-Man them. And I had I had, I guess, a North Star, which was I wanted to own a large portfolio of control but minority positions in well-located, well-renovated Los Angeles apartment buildings, and to self-manage, because I really do think that creates that's very important for returns. And so I had that as like sort of the North Star, but like as in terms of how we got there, there was a lot of like just, kind of just taking whatever moved us in that direction a little bit.
And figuring it out and kind of adapting to what changes. And Los Angeles is notorious for changing things all the time. So you really have to be adaptive, which, no pun intended or pun intended.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's actually funny. The name of the company, the reason we called it Adaptive, this is, people laugh about this. In 2011, when we were choosing a name, we felt like the opportunity to buy cheap apartment buildings was already past. And the likelihood was that we were going to end up doing a lot of adaptive reuse projects that we thought we were going to be like going and buying office buildings downtown. Right? Okay. So we called it. Little did we know, of course, that there was like another 10 years of runway.
Exactly.
In the apartment business. And we actually have never done an adaptive reuse deal, although I've looked at a million of them. I would love to do them.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's why Adaptive is called Adaptive.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. So we talked a little bit about on the prep call, Los Angeles. There's been a lot of changes. You've been in this market, this area for, I would say, over a decade plus.
Yeah, I've been doing real estate deals here since 2008. I lived here since 2007.
So what is the current landscape of Los Angeles versus what it was previously, and how do you feel like moving forward, if the same opportunity is there, or if the risk versus the reward of owning, investing, buying in Los Angeles is everything that it once was?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a much worse opportunity than it used to be. Like the way that it used to work when we got into the business, it was so beautiful. I think I have a blog post about this at some point. It's about like how California is like Shangri-La for property owners. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have this really negative impression of California, have always had a negative impression of California as this place that's like crazy taxes, crazy regulation.
Yeah.
But for property owners, California, it still is pretty good, but it was amazing. And what I mean by that is, and specifically in Los Angeles, what I mean is, okay, so first of all, it's changing now because of the EMBs, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But for a long time, you couldn't build anything. It was very, very hard to build. Okay. So very hard for supply to grow. Tons of demand. Mm-hmm. Like the city was getting richer and there were more people who want to live here, whatever. Okay. So you got all this demand. You got no supply. Okay. Then the property tax, because of Prop 13, your property taxes, which is your largest operating expense were fixed at 1.25% roughly of your acquisition price and could only rise by 2% a year. So that's your largest expense item, could only rise by 2% a year. Meanwhile, the way that the RSO, the rent stabilization law, used to work is that the minimum legal annual increase was 3%. Mm-hmm. So even if you did not like turn over any units, as long as you took your 3% increase every year, and by the way, like many mom and pop owners didn't, and they're crazy people, but because you can't get it retroactively.
Yeah.
Over time, your even if all you did was get the 3%, your revenue was growing faster than your most expensive, your most important cost line, and the result of that was that your margin was expanding. And that's why people are permanent holders in California in general and specifically in Los Angeles. So you have this like amazing situation. And you can, for a while there, particularly post GFC, you'd like interest rates were really low and you could buy like real 6 caps or something. Mm-hmm. So you could like, without doing any work, you could buy a building that was in reasonable shape as a 6 cap. You could finance it more cheaply than that. And you didn't have to like add any value or anything. It was just like immediately it was a reasonable yield and it got better over time. And it was just like that opportunity. I mean, in retrospect, I should have just bought more instead of doing so many renovation projects. We could talk about why, like the smart thing to do is just go around and buy a bunch of like, just go, in a situation like that. But yeah, it was really amazing. Now, what happened is COVID. What broke it is COVID. I mean, there were some changes to the composition of the city council that have been going on. The city council has been moving left and in my opinion is now like off the deep end. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But what happened during COVID, I mean, people focused on the eviction moratorium, which that was bad. Okay. I mean, and we could talk for
3.5 years, 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, it was insane. I mean, we wrote off hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of rent where it was just like, look, this person stopped paying. They owe us $30,000. And like the best thing to do, we don't know when we're going to get the apartment back. So the best thing to do is just like make a deal to like write it off and let them leave and just get the apartment back and re-rent it. And like,
which is thousands of units, thousands of properties.
It was just like, I mean, that was terrible. Okay. But in many ways, the other things were worse. So, one was no rent increases during an inflationary environment for like 4 years or whatever it was, 3 years.
Hyperinflation.
Yeah. So like real estate, which, there's a dispute about whether real estate is or isn't an inflation hedge, but like for sure in an environment where wages are going crazy and where as an owner, where your costs, like, okay, yeah, your property taxes are fixed, but like insurance is going crazy and your operating expenses, your repairs and maintenance, et cetera, are going crazy. Like to have a zero rent increase for that, like in my opinion, that fundamentally sort of like broke an implicit like covenant between city government on the one hand and housing providers on the other. It was like before there was sort of a sense that you were being treated reasonably fairly as an owner, and like you can't zero people on rent increases during a highly inflationary period and not break that covenant. So basically, like I have lost trust in city government as a result. So that's one thing to say. And then another thing is, it is very much up in the air what future rent increases will be. But in my opinion, they are likely to end up at something like whatever 2/3 of CPI. In other words, to be locked below the inflation rate,
which is just crazy.
So and then there's obviously the vacancy control stuff floating in the air about the Justice for Renters Act, but
Prop 33.
Even that, leaving that aside, those actions, in my opinion, dramatically change the risk calculus for investing specifically in apartments generally in Los Angeles, but specifically for older buildings.
And you obviously during COVID, you experienced this firsthand, as you mentioned, and also during that time, and I don't know if this was a year ago or a recent, but you started something or were a partner in something called ReSeed.
Sure. Yep.
Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, sure. So
was that an impetus for seeing LA and being like, hey, I have a operational experience and I have value and a network, which we can get into as well, and I can truly add value and diversify?
So the impetus for ReSeed, that was like the second part of the thought process. The first part was my partner Rhett, in ReSeed, Rhett Bennett, who's a great guy, came to me when he was working at his old company. He was basically managing like a lot of money, I think with a B.
Jesus.
For one wealthy family.
Wow.
And they wanted to build a real estate portfolio. He was looking around for operators. He found me. I think he actually came to the first reconvene. It's the conference that my wife and I run. We got to know each other. And he came to me, he came toward LA, and I was showing him projects, and he's like, okay, like, great. Like, can you guys take $50 million? I was like, dude, like, I have nothing to buy. Like, there's just like, there's nothing there. So
that must have been hard.
Yeah. And so, well, yeah, but I mean, it was like very obvious. I mean, I had given back a fund we had raised, because I couldn't put it out. And so Rhett that was like, okay, that was a light bulb moment for him. And then he sort of went away, and then he came to me with the ReSeed idea more or less fully formed. He's like, look, you have this audience, you could probably attract operators, and you know how to do this business and in a sustainable way. I can bring capital, and I've got this capital basically raised. Will you come help me? And by the way, I also have all these like amazing people who I've also convinced to join the company. We have other people who are working with us who are fantastic. And so for me, like it was obvious. Like I like teaching people anyway, and it was a cool way but you're right. Like purely from a financial perspective, it has been nice to sort of start, not that I'm making very much money from ReSeed yet, but the idea is to build a business that is not so geographically dependent on Los Angeles.
Do you, in terms of percentage of like wealth and net worth, do you feel like, because you have also a successful Reconvene, which is a conference as well, which does very well, brings a ton of like incredible operators, owners, things together, which I think is in itself really, really cool.
Thank you.
Do you feel like, looking forward, you have an idea of what you want your time / portfolio / allocation to look like? Do you want to see yourself more on the teaching, coaching / the ReSeed side of it being the majority? Do you feel like this conference thing could be something you want to expand, or the principal side?
Look, the best business is the principal side.
Yeah.
Like by far.
Why do you say that?
It's just like, the economics for the GP are so good. They're particularly in the way that we have it sort of set up. So we have done enough deals with enough investors and done well enough and treated them fairly and everything, such that we don't need to put up any material co-invest if we don't want to into deals. So like the economics just get stupid, and there's a reason for that. We can talk, but it wasn't always that way.
Mm-hmm.
But so if you have a business where the way, you don't have to put up a co-invest, you get a fee, and then you get an ownership stake after return of capital and the pref. That's like a perpetual motion machine. Like if you can turn that crank, you should keep turning that crank as much as you can. But the problem is that the reason that we can turn that crank is because we have always been pretty disciplined about which deals we do. And so it's this catch-22 where it's like, yes, in theory, I have this great setup where I have investors who are willing to let me like do this perpetual motion thing. Mm-hmm. But if there aren't deals, there aren't deals. And I suppose I could, there's always obviously the temptation to kind of squint and maybe like hope that you see a deal in there that doesn't actually exist. Mm-hmm. But you get away with that a few times, and before you've like lit all this investor trust on fire and like view, when you're thinking about a career in investment management, and this is very important for young people, like the value of investor relationships properly understood is so high, because the investment management is an amazing business. You can do it for 40 years or something, and you can make a ton of money, and people are happy for you to do that as long as you like keep the faith with them, as long as you don't lose their trust, right? Mm-hmm. The second you lose their trust, it's like, screw you, you're out of business, right? And now you've lost this like incredibly lucrative opportunity. So anyway, so my view is that like I have those investor relationships because I've behaved for the most part in a restrained way, and by behaved in a restrained way, I mean not done dumb shit. Mm-hmm, yeah. And so the problem and the reason that we haven't been buying much in Los Angeles recently is because when I look around at the numbers, it's like, this is dumb. Yeah. And if I brought this stuff, I'd be embarrassed to bring the numbers that we're looking at deals every single day. We're underwriting stuff. I would be embarrassed to bring those deals to our investors. Yeah. And they would lose respect for me if I did bring them to them. So anyway, so that's why we haven't been very active over the last couple of years. So the answer is, I would like, if you gave me the choice of all the things I could do with my time, the thing that I would like to do most right now is to grow the principal side of our business. Mm-hmm. In Southern California. Mm-hmm. Currently, I do not see an avenue for doing that would generate sufficiently high risk-adjusted returns to make it make sense for me and the investors. That could change tomorrow. Like we might find, hopefully knock on wood, we'll find a great deal. In the absence of those opportunities, I'm not going to, as I said, try to jam deals down people's throats. So I have time to explore these other things. So we are growing our property management business, which is another one. It's like, we only want to work with a certain kind of owner. Like we're looking specifically for owners who intend to own their properties indefinitely and want to take care of their buildings. Like we're just not getting in the slumlord business. Yeah. So it's like, But for the kind of owner who just like wants to run a good building and have it forever and have people do a reasonably good job of taking care of it and doing a good job leasing, we're very happy to work with those owners. And we've, over the years, sort of managed to put together a small group of sort of professional owners who tend to own lots of buildings and trust us to run them. And so we add those owners slowly, because our criteria for who we're willing to work with is quite narrow. We turn away a lot of business, which has the effect of inhibiting the growth rate of that business. But fine, I don't care. I want to have a good, sane property management business, not something that's going crazy. So we're doing that, and then I have this time to explore these other opportunities, and there's different risk and reward profiles for each of them, and I'm kind of enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean it's cool to have your hands in different things too, and get ideas from different people as well that you can implement into your own business.
For sure. Yeah. No, I've it's actually really cool. So ReSeed, we've seeded 8 operators. We're in the process.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're in the process of adding 4 to 6 more, I think, in the second cohort. And they're in all different markets all over the country. And it's so cool to get to see what the returns look like in these different markets and what kind of, we're in contract. I don't know if we'll do it, but we're in contract to buy a pretty, nice sized, affordable deal in Northern Virginia right now. And I've never bought an affordable deal before.
Yeah.
I've never bought a deal in Northern Virginia, but it's so interesting. I've learned a ton, and actually, from a risk-adjusted reward perspective, that feels like a very nice deal compared to the stuff I'm seeing in LA, for example. So yeah, it's been amazing to learn from those people.
I've noticed too, and someone else sat in this chair and had a similar sentiment and vein. He goes, we're looking at other markets, but the biggest key for us, if we're deciding to go into a new market, is we need to have boots on the ground presence. We need to have someone who understands the lay of the land. And where I think a lot of people got in trouble, and we're seeing it a little bit on, in the news, the headlines of these big companies who are giving these properties back, is there wasn't that deep knowledge, understanding, and especially for Los Angeles, and I'm sure it's similar in other markets, street by street, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, things are different.
Yeah, I mean so you have a choice. I mean, I could have tried to grow Adaptive, for example, into a regional or national business where we would invest all, but I am so aware of how much I know about LA, right? And I don't even there's been recent changes to the zoning code through all the various state laws.
Yep.
I'm not even really an expert in the zoning code.
I'll tell you, it's going to take you about a PhD to figure this shit out.
So I'm not even, I went from I would have said I was an absolute expert prior to 3-4 years ago in Los Angeles. And even now I'm a little less of an expert, particularly when it comes to ground up stuff than I was previously. But I really know a lot. I know, not only do I know the current rules, I know the history of the rules and why they change and all that stuff. And so the idea of waltzing into another market and being just 'cause I have some acquisitions guy who sits with me in LA and is hey, that looks cheap. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
So, and that is to a large extent one of the ideas behind ReSeed was to say, look, we want to be in these other markets. We need to have boots on the ground. Rather than trying to create an organization where those people are our employees, we would prefer to try to attract more entrepreneurial type people who have real skin in the game, and therefore we're going to set up an organization where they have their own freestanding GP businesses, and we have sort of the right. We own a small piece effectively of their GP businesses. But then we have the right to provide capital to the deals they find, not the obligation, the right. And the result of that is hopefully that you've got a bunch of freestanding people with skin in the game, local boots on the ground, going around and finding the smartest ways to deploy capital in their markets.
Interesting. So I feel a theme in terms of the businesses that you start, there has to be operational values that are just almost in stone. And in terms of what I mean by that is, what you're good at, and what you're maybe not as good at, and where your strengths are, and where your weaknesses are. And the businesses that you seem to go into, and again, not without its risks and uncertainties and figuring out along the way, which being an operator and owner and a broker and a manager, you deal with that all the time. It's constant. But it seems like you've figured out where your niche is and have been able to really lean into that. And through the relationships, which I'd be curious to talk about too, how the social media has impacted, because I think you're one of the broadest in terms of networks, specifically even from like a principal side in the country. And so how is that network effect and being so connected to everyone else, how has that impacted your business, and how do you leverage that, I guess you could say, to be a better owner or operator, everything?
Yeah, big question. So the first thing to say is that the reason that I have been able to build the audience that I have, and the audience is like originally in the blog, and then later on X, I guess we're calling it now.
Yeah, X.
To much lesser extent on LinkedIn, my email list. The reason that I've been able to build that, I think, is because we were and are very deep in the weeds of actually buying buildings and renovating them and managing them. I was able and continue to be able to write with a lot of specificity about those things, right? And then there's some ancillary things too, like building a small business, because effectively that's what a GP business is. Mm-hmm. And also, we also bootstrapped a property management business while we were doing the GP thing, which was really crazy and hard. And I'm not sure I would recommend anyone to do it, but we did it. And so I think that those actual experiences came through in the writing.
Yeah.
And that is why I've been able to build the audience. And there are some byproducts of that. Like when you write every day about the specific issues that you are dealing with in your business and how you're thinking about them and how you're solving problems, et cetera, one of the things that you're doing is building trust with your audience. Like anyone can kind of like fake it for 5 posts or 12 posts. You can get some like ghostwriter or whatever, but if you keep showing up, like I've been writing on Twitter every single day for 5 years, and for the most part, like very, pretty detailed posts on all aspects.
There's thought behind it. Like if anyone goes and checks out Moses Kagan, like you'll know this wasn't just like a, I'm on the toilet and I'm writing some, maybe, sometimes, but like there's thought, there's actual, you're thinking about not only the content itself, but how it's going to resonate with the audience, which I think is a skill. And I know your history and writing and kind of for the creative side. So it definitely shows from the care.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think, look, I this is going to sound like bragging, but when I was in 7th grade, I took the SATs, right? Because I wanted
7th grade?
Yeah, I wanted to go to nerd camp. There was this I saw this poster for nerd camp, CTY, for those of you from the East Coast. And the deal was you had to take the SATs in 7th grade. If you scored highly enough, you could take a college class in 3 weeks in the summer on a college campus. And like I particularly at that point in my life, I was a very competitive person, particularly academically. So it was like, oh, okay, wait a second. There's like a contest to get into nerd camp. I'm going to sign up for that. And so I did, and I scored really highly on the verbal SATs when I was in 7th grade. And it basically, I am whatever. There's one of the talents that I've got in my life is I'm good at communicating and writing. And so one of the things that I think has been weird about my career is, in some sense, like I'm I think I have a very good brain for that. Yeah. I'm not like, whatever. I'm not going to write the great American novel. I'm certainly not like an academic writer, but I'm a good writer. But I've applied those writing skills, and also I think I'm a pretty self-aware person, and I think about things a lot, whatever. To this like weird thing, like buying like crappy little apartment buildings and managing them in LA. That's like not something that people who have like a lot of writing skills typically have devoted their career. So I'm effectively like a professional writer who writes about this like weird business. And I think that like it comes across and resonates, and it builds trust, and that has led to all the different things we talked about. I mean, our largest investor we met through our old CPA, so I can't take credit for that one, but the vast majority of the rest of the capital we've ever raised is people who found me originally from the blog or from Twitter. And then the brokerage business that we've stopped now, but we were doing buy-side brokerage. That was pretty much all people from the blog. And then the property management business is almost has been fed by the other parts of our business. But like when we get new clients, it's almost always because of my writing. And the event, the conference reconvene that we run is the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's like the audience is there because there's a bunch of writing skill and effort that's being applied to this super niche topic. And then there's sort of various ways in which I use the power of that audience to build businesses that I find interesting.
Do you think about when you're writing posts or blogs or newsletters, do you think about like, what is your process and like, this needs to be said and, or I want this to have X outcome, or you're just like, this is interesting, I'm going to write it eloquently, exoteric, as I had said previously. Like, do you have process behind that? Is there a why, a reason?
It's a really good question. I've actually been thinking about this a lot. One of the things that we're doing at Reconvene at my event this year, which is at the end of September, is I'm gonna lead a breakout. I did this last year, doing it again this year on capital raising, modern capital raising, and it touches on a lot of the social media stuff. And so I've been in preparation for that, sort of starting to try to think about, because a lot of what I do is not that conscious. And I'm like, okay, what is actually going on when I'm writing this stuff? And there are a couple of things. One is, and this is, I think, very important for anyone who's writing for an audience. Well, first of all, the observation is that it is not one audience. Okay. Anyone's audience on social media, if you're going to write for a niche, it's like, think of it as like a Venn diagram. Okay. Like you are at the center of a number of different overlapping sub audiences. Okay. And so for example, for me, like obviously multifamily real estate in Los Angeles is probably like the core center of it. Right. But I also have effectively like permission from the audience to write about investing in other kinds of real estate and in other markets, in part because of ReSeed, in part, I have permission to write about bootstrapping our property management business. I have permission to write about capital raising, right? I have permission to write about local politics because, of course, real estate is totally enmeshed in fact, in local, state, and federal, from a tax perspective, politics. So that's the first observation, is to say that like you need to think carefully about what those sub audiences are, and then each post or blog post or LinkedIn, whatever, is going to hit one or more of those sub audiences, right? And so, and it's sort of important. Like, you don't want to, like, if I suddenly started writing about politics all the time, for example, right? Like, I would alienate all the other sub audiences. They would be like, dude, I'm sick of hearing about California bullshit. Like, stop it. I'm not, so you have to kind of think about, okay, well, what have I written recently and how does it like appeal to those different sub audiences? So that's one thing. That's like in the weeds, but like more philosophically, I'm interested in writing about things where some problem has emerged in our business and we have come up with some way of solving it that is novel. So, or if not novel, then at least different from the way most people do it. So, as I've said and written plenty of times, I've never worked for anyone else in real estate. And there were a lot of bad things that came from that. Like, I made so many stupid mistakes that, like, if I had had a mentor, they would have been like, you fucking idiot, don't do that.
Yeah.
And we didn't know, so we did it. But we also, because we didn't have a mentor saying, this is how you do this, when we were confronted with a challenge, we just like solved it in the smartest way that we could solve it. Okay. And without really knowing or caring how that related to how other people had solved the problem.
Was that the right way or wrong way?
Yeah. And again, it led to some real stupid stuff and mistakes and whatever, but it also led us to some fairly differentiated ways of both seeing the world, seeing deals, and operating and everything. And I think that, and those, I think for people who are investors and operators, they are familiar with those problems. Like, everyone knows that there's a problem with pricing vacant apartments. Like, that is a problem that owners and managers face. Everyone knows that there's a problem of like, how do you incentivize leasing people, right?
Yeah.
So and on and on. There's a million things we can talk about. So I think one of the best kinds of posts that I do are where I like hone in on this specific technical problem in the business, talk about how other people maybe have solved it, why I don't think that that's smart, and how we have instead solved it. And I think those really resonate because it's like, again, because a lot of people are facing the exact problem. They're like, oh, that's smart. And so I love that because there's like a number of effects, right? Like one is it's helping people.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, you were helping them avoid. Yeah. I'm effectively being the mentor that I didn't have.
Yeah.
I love that. There's like separate from the money. I just love it. I'm a teacher in some ways by temperament. But also it like has the side benefit of developing trust from prospective partners because they're like, oh, that is smart. And they read you write a bunch of smart stuff over and over and over again for years. And they're like, this guy's pretty smart. And if he comes to me and says, hey, I've got a deal I want to do. Would you capitalize it? Like, you're probably going to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, which I think it's I can tell you whether recently being able to quantify or verbally state that, which you did clearly, I think you had a natural inclination for doing this over the years, even starting the blog, which you can see throughout the growth. Cause I've went back, and I know a lot of people do this too, is they'll go back and read your old posts and like see how you were thinking about situations. And what I am very interested in, because I've kind of hopped on this social stuff as well, and really it was actually to more follow people like you and owners that I wanted to kind of build relationships with, but learn from. And I was struggling with this fact that I was not from LA. I didn't know anyone.
Yep.
I was just like, how do I earn business?
Yep.
Yeah. How do I earn business and building trust and be able to share? Because I cared so much. I was obsessed with this thing that was multifamily in Los Angeles. How can I get that message out to more people without picking up the phone every day and leaving a voicemail, which 95% of the calls go to? And so I think understanding your audience, which it sounds like to me, are you writing towards operators, owners, brokers, like anyone who touches real estate? Or is when you're thinking about like, okay, this post is going towards X, Y, and Z, I want this post to resonate with wealthy, high net worth individuals who might contribute capital. Like, does that ever come across in how you word things or organize things?
I definitely, it's not the case that I'm like, that I think, oh, I'm going to write today's post is going to be to try to attract investors, and tomorrow's post is going to be try to attract property management clients.
Yeah.
It's more like I'm inspired by some problem in the business that I'm currently facing, or one which something has triggered a memory from something, a problem we faced previously. And so I'm going to write about it. But one, the way I do think about when I'm wording it, I'm thinking about how to make the writing itself as impactful as it can be, and also with an eye towards having it be accepted by the audience to which it's most likely to with whom it's most likely to resonate. So I've got that going on. But then I'm also thinking, like, as I said before, I'm thinking about the mix of things that I write about so as not to alienate any particular part of the audience by overly focusing on something that they're not interested in, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, it does. So curious to know, because I'm a big proponent of studying. Like, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to is Founders, because it studies the history of.
I love David.
I'm a history guy. David Center does a fantastic job. I don't know how he does that podcast so well, but it shows.
He's an obsessive.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've been fortunate enough to get to know David.
Yeah.
And if you meet him in person, if you sit down for lunch with him, he is exactly the way he is on that podcast.
Which is so amazing. And I love it. It like speaks to me. I'm a big, like, obsessive Kobe, Michael, like Tiger, those guys. Again, not everything, but the focus, so focused on one thing. So if you had to start with the knowledge that you have, but zero today, no properties, no management company.
Yep.
You were transported from the middle of, Europe, and you're like, hey, I'm planting my flag, kind of like what a lot of people did back in the, 50s, 60s. What would be your strategy? What would you focus on? Would you focus on LA? And how would you try to make that as successful as possible? And when do you think you could do that?
Well, man, there's so many. That's an interesting question. So one thing to say is it sort of depends on whether you mean, are they sure that they want to go into real estate?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to be in real estate. I would say that LA is not the place that I would go into real estate from a standing start, for sure. There are some things about it that are very good. Maybe I'll go into that now. What is really good and what allowed me to get my start about LA is because we have this stupid zoning code that this like suburban zoning code that limits the size of the buildings for most part. The deal size, the bite size is quite small. So there are apartment buildings that you can buy in Los Angeles for $1 million. I mean, they're crappy, they're little whatever, 2 million, whatever. So you can get in the, like, there's not, that doesn't really exist in New York in the same way, maybe in the far outer boroughs. But like, so you obviously can't be like, unless you come from a spectacularly wealthy family or have other connections, like you're not going to start buying buildings in Manhattan when you start your career. Like, it just doesn't work like that. So LA is just this, like, it's a very good place to start in that sense because there are a lot of smaller opportunities, both from a brokerage perspective and also on the principal side. Like, it's not, as a new broker, you're not trying to convince someone to like let you sell $40 million bill. It's like you can get them to sell you a $1 million, they'll let you sell a $1 million bill, $2 million.
I wish someone would have told me that in the beginning.
So that's, I think LA is good for that. But, in general, I think that, so LA is not growing, but California is not growing. Like, we as a state, and maybe this is going to change, I hope it does, we have made a series of decisions around land use and regulation and everything else that have the effect of kind of like calcifying our civilization, our society in California, such that it's very hard to grow. The pie is not growing, right? It's like, it's sort of, I mean, the economy is growing, but like the number of people is not growing, the number of unit building. And so it's, as a new entrant into a market, if the market is not growing, like the only way that you can build a business and get market share is to take from existing incumbent players. And that is very hard because they establish reputations and relationships and track records and everything. If you contrast that with a place like, I mean, the craziest example would be like the North Dallas suburbs, right? Yeah. North Dallas suburbs, like fast, it's growing the way Los Angeles grew in the 60s, right? Like just explosive growth. Okay. So when you have like a civilization that's growing like that, the opportunities, you can start a business, whether it's brokerage or principal investing or development or whatever, and you can grow a business and you don't have to necessarily take share at all from incumbent players. It's just like new business. Yeah. The market's pulling you because there's people moving there, and that is going on in like it's bidirectional, but like that's going. So the regulation, it's low regulation, so there's that growth, and it's easier to do business, which is why there's the growth. And it's like, if I were a young person, for sure I would go to one of these places that's growing really fast and go try to do business there. And
how would you grow that business? Because with your same skill set, like you know how to write, you know how to communicate, you know how to, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. So I think that building an audience is extremely valuable. I sort of think that anyone who is ambitious in almost any field would be best served by building an audience. It just creates opportunities for you that don't exist if you don't have one. And the thing is that most people are not suited to build an audience. So it's like, there are a bunch of people who, like, that's just not their thing, and it's totally fine. And God knows I'm very happy because I would rather be able to hire people who like work all day instead of like being on Twitter. Yeah. And like, so anyway, but if you are the type of person who is like excited about the prospect of writing or speaking or whatever in public, it's a force multiplier. So, okay. So people should do it if they're suited to it. As to how they should do it specifically, what I would say is the following. There is enormous, the way it works is, you can write a blog the way that I did. Okay. And the problem is that you don't get distribution. right? I spent years banging my head against the wall with the blog. I got some, eventually Google started sending me people and stuff, but like the blog, I don't think the blog ever had more than like a few thousand readers concurrently, in a month or something.
Yeah.
Like it's not like it was a very small. Now, because it was so niche, all 2,000 of those people were like likely to buy apartment buildings. So it actually worked out great for me.
Yeah.
But there was no distribution. Contrast that with the social networks, which originally Facebook but then Instagram and Twitter and Snap and whatever else. Those networks give you enormous distribution, like enormous. Like before on Twitter, we could talk more about this, but you used to have build a follower account. TikTok revolutionized social because actually the TikTok algorithm does not really care how many followers you have. So it prioritizes, is the content good? Mm-hmm. And then it just will, so you could have no followers. You make a great little video and boom. Okay. And more and more social media is going to move in that direction. So it's amazing. They're giving you free distribution.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that if you are dependent on their distribution, they can take it away from you. Mm-hmm. And that is what has happened to a large extent on Twitter over the last couple of years since Elon Musk bought it. Before I could write something and I could be reasonably confident that roughly all of my followers my readers would see it. As Musk sort of TikTokified the X algorithm. And the result of that is that only a very small fraction of my audience is going to see any individual post. Okay. And which is annoying for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. But the result is that effectively the value of my audience has declined. Mm-hmm. And so I think the lesson of that, and it's stupid because I knew this lesson and I still screwed it up. Out of laziness mostly. Yeah. The lesson is you cannot be dependent on the platform because there's just platform risk. Mm-hmm. So you have to be driving people to a form of communication that you can control, which is probably wants to be an email list. Maybe it's texts or something, mm-hmm. but you have to sort of leverage the distribution that they give you to grow your own list. And the problem is, of course, that they don't want you to do that. Right?
Exactly.
They're like, no. And so an example of that is like, if you go ahead and post a link on X and exactly. That's impressive. It's like the algorithm effectively laughs at you.
Yeah.
It shows it to 3 people.
Yeah. You thought you were going to get them off here. No.
And again, it's understandable from their perspective. The incentive, of course, is that they want to keep people on X so they can keep showing them ads. They don't want them going to your blog or your mailing list or whatever. So anyway, so that's a long answer. So as a young person, I think, it would be good to experiment with a number of different social channels, social platforms, to find the one that fits you best. Mm. Okay. And I think it kind of doesn't matter so much if it's YouTube or whether it's Snap or whatever. Obviously those are all going to have different audiences. Mm-hmm. So you have to think about that a little bit, but so you kind of want to find the one that works best for you, invest there, just make a lot of content for them, but be ruthless about making sure that you are extracting the email addresses such that they're getting from you. You're like a full-time job providing them free content. Mm-hmm. That's what they want. Yeah. Right? So fine. Okay. They're going to give you the distribution in exchange for the content. Great. But the other piece of the puzzle is you need to be getting an ability to contact your investors, or your audience off platform.
Got it. And you have, and I want to take the flip side of that. So remind me to talk about the older generation, mm-hmm. but you have some kids, yep. and I'm curious to know, young boys, what are you telling them?
Do you mean about career and future and stuff?
Yeah.
It's not one message. Basically I drive, so I have 13, 11, and 4. And I spend a lot of time in the morning. I drive the older 2 guys to school every day, and then the younger guy is not really. He's just started to be old enough to get these lectures.
Yeah.
But I've been lecturing them their whole lives on it. But it's not. It's on all aspects of the business. So I'm not they're not anywhere close to like needing actual concrete advice about should I go in this field or that field. But I am consciously trying to educate them about business and investing and like for a number of reasons. I am very I share wins with them. Mm-hmm. I make it a point to share losses. Mm-hmm. Like I want them to understand that for better or worse, their dad is engaged in this thing that's like, it's on him. How much money he makes every year is on him, and he's going to have good years and bad years. He's stressed out sometimes, and he's elated some other times. Mm-hmm. And like, because for me, when I was growing up, I actually my grandparents, like I have business people, small scale entrepreneurs in my background. Yeah. My parents had a tiny real estate business, but they were full-time employee, professor and a New York State government worker. I somehow, for basically my entire upbringing, like missed how exciting business is. Okay. I started reading the newspaper at nerd camp when I was like 12 or something, or 13. And I would like read the front section, and then I would like throw the business section out because it was boring. And then I would go to like read about international affairs and sports and whatever. Yeah. And what's crazy about it, and I think a lot of people are like that. Yeah. They're like eyes glazed over. And it's like, once you understand what's going on, the business section is by far the most interesting part of the newspaper, right? It's like huge fortunes being won and lost, like catastrophes, huge failure, frauds, just the most interesting, dramatic stuff. And it'd be like, just like dry language about like an acquisition of one company by another. And it's like, someone just had made like a multi-generational fortune. Yeah. Right. And it was like described in this like dry language about an acquisition and like the 6th page of the business section. And it's like, when you understand what's really going on and what the stakes are, it's just like, it's so exciting. Like, let me say another thing. The way I've come to think about business is it's like, it's a game, right? It's a game. But it's a game that can be played like it's being played by like people running like a newspaper route or like a little neighborhood coffee shop or something, and it's being played by like Mark Zuckerberg and Warren Buffett, whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's the same game. Yeah. Right? Yep. And there's literally nothing stopping you from wherever level you enter going up pretty high. I mean, a lot of it's luck, and there's all kinds of things, and obviously it helps to come from a privileged background in various ways. But like plenty of people who came from a lot less than me have done way better than me. Plenty of people who have worse educational backgrounds have done way better than me. And some of it's luck, but like some of it's just skills and, and determination and whatever. And it's like, it's so amazing. This is the game. We all have the same, like, or not the same, but like roughly the same equal access to the people and the capital and you're just kind of like reconfiguring those ingredients in different ways. And sometimes you hit it and and other times you're stuck running a little coffee shop for a long time. You have to decide, do you want to keep running that coffee shop or sell it, start something else? Like, it's just endlessly fascinating. Yeah. In my opinion, it's by far the most interesting thing that like a motivated person could devote their life to. Because the reward is like bajillions and like fantasy superhero. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the skill stacking that I think a lot of people in our industry too, because it is very much like a independent contractor, entrepreneurial, principal side, entrepreneurial. And like we see, or at least I notice and see and track what other people are doing in different industries and try to figure out, okay, can that be? And the answer is yes, most times. Can I take what they're doing in that niche and transfer it over to mine? Sure. Right. And how can I do that? And what's the most economical way, or what's the most creative way, or what fuels and fills me? And I think people who don't feel that way, because there are people who just, they don't have that bug inside of them. Like they don't get it when you're like, no, like I'm working Saturday because I really enjoy it. And I have this complex problem that I'm trying to solve. And like, it's incredible. And I love trying to figure it out. And I'm going to study this and that and that. And I'm going to try a bunch of these different things. And some of them are going to work and most of them are going to fail. But like that game, once you realize it's a game, it becomes addicting. It's an addicting thing.
It's awesome. And I mean, like I just want to be very clear that I'm not even very good at it. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm okay. Yeah. Like I think I'm pretty good at describing it. So I think that's where the audience, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think that the audience, it's funny, I have people who read what I write who like have never bought a building before, or they own like a couple little rentals. But I have a lot of people who read what I write who like are way more successful than I am. You know what I mean? Like they're like, and it's, in some ways it's kind of funny. They'll reach out and be like, this is exactly how I feel. And you're like, thank you, Mr. Guy who owns $1 billion or $5 billion or whatever stuff. It feels very cool and validating to have that audience, to have both ends of that audience. But I do want to be really clear that like, I'm okay at this game, not even that great, and it's super exciting. But getting to watch people who are playing it, several levels above, it's just I'm going to drop his name. I've got to know Moise Ali, the founder of Native Deodorant, pretty well, and his brother Suleiman Ali, and the way that they think about business is like, it's like so much more sophisticated than the way that I think about it. And like I've learned from them, and like obviously there are levels above those guys too, but just even see like what they think of as possible and what can be done and how to think about a problem and how to think about buying or starting or whatever it is. It's just like, whoa.
And when you experience that firsthand, and those guys are fantastic. Suli's a good buddy of mine as well. And it's just like, I think that is another factor of the social and growing the audience and stuff, is you get to get in rooms that you should not be in,
for sure,
right? From just like a pure skill standpoint. And that's one thing that brokerage, I think, brought to me too, and the calling, which, on the surface seems like an annoyance or whatever, but I'm so grateful for it because I got in rooms and to meet people who were so much more successful than me because I had something of value to be able to share with them, which were deals, right? And I think it is a great path to be able to meet significantly skilled and highly, highly successful people in their field. And especially if you want to grow and be that person, like that's your North Star per se.
I mean, for me, specifically Twitter, which is what it was called back then, what is so amazing about it is you literally can write your way into a room with your heroes. Like, it's like, at one point, like I've become friendly with Sam Hinkie a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, I'm a major basketball nerd. Like that's like, one of my hobbies is like, I've been following like a statistical Knicks blog for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is really the saddest thing I could possibly say probably on a podcast. But so like and Hinkie is like the personification of the like nerd GM, to the point where they ran him out of the league because he was exploiting the inefficiencies of the market and the league to such a great extent. They were just like, all right, stop that guy out here.
You're too good.
But so like this guy's like in some sense like a hero of mine.
Yeah.
And then to be like X number, to start writing on Twitter, just for writing dumb stuff in the morning while I'm drinking my coffee, and then to look up in like 2 years and like Sam's in my office and we're having a conversation, and it's just like, it is just incredible. For someone like me who, I mean, I went to good schools and everything, so I got access that way, but like my family we're from Troy, New York.
Yeah.
My dad's an immigrant, was born in a refugee camp. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
crazy.
You kind of like, you just buy, it's such a, in some sense, an intellectual free market or democracy. It's like, you can write you could be an anonymous account with like a rabbit as your PFP and like just write smart stuff. And within X number of years, you're like in rooms with your heroes. It's amazing.
Which is so incredible. And I think everyone should at least explore it, right? Like you said, figure it out. Some people write better. Some people like to do video. Some people like to
dance on TikTok.
Exactly. Dance on TikTok, and they get their clients. Honestly, we were talking about that in terms of leasing, like some strategies regarding that, which I guess we'll wrap up on. I want to talk to you about the property management stuff because I know you're trying to grow that. But just figure it out, like test it out, do stuff, just do.
Yeah, I would say actually that's very good advice. Like I think a big mistake that I have made as a business person, and part of it has to do with the nature of real estate, but I have not tried enough stuff in general. Like one of the things I've learned from Moise and Sully, I mean others too, but watching them, is like Moise actually wrote this amazing piece. He founded a business called Caskers, which is like some liquor delivery business or something.
Yeah.
And it sort of started, it did okay, and I think he sold it. And he wrote about it, and it was like, what he wrote about specifically was his choice to sell it. The business was doing okay. It was growing. He was working really fucking hard to grow it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like a monster. Like you could tell that it was a grind to grow it. And what he did is he sold it and went and looked for other opportunities, and then like eventually hit on something that boom. Like I think Native
was the one.
I think they took. I'm sure he's had other successes too.
Yeah.
I think it was like $500K of angel investment. They sold it for $100 million.
Yeah.
Right. Boom.
Yeah.
And Marshall Haas actually is another one. The guy who started Support Shepherd somewhere.
Yes.
I don't know him well, but he's had a number of like mostly entrepreneurial failures. A few sort of like things that sort of worked a little bit, and then for him, the offshore talent business turned out ugly. Okay, I have not done anywhere near enough experimentation in that regard. Like I found a thing that worked, and I was just like, let's just like keep turning the crank, and it worked pretty well, and I'm happy that I did it and everything. But particularly for young people, I think having that like. Trying some stuff until you find something that is explosive is very good advice. If something's like really hard, if you don't feel like the market is like pulling you a little bit, like maybe consider trying something else. Either a different strategy in what you're doing or something else entirely. But like there are opportunities out there where like the right idea and execution hits the right demand, and it's like, oh. And as a young person, particularly when you're unencumbered with like family and tuition bills, whatever, like it's worth like not getting stuck in a particular route a little bit. Like it's worth looking for one of those rocket ship opportunities.
You don't have exactly the tuition, the family. All you have is your time. I tell, because I have a younger sister as well. I'm like, just do a bunch of stuff and see what you're really passionate about, but also what the market will pay you for, what they see value in, and keep trying and keep doing it until that perfect combination of this and timing and your skill set and just like boom, right? Because who cares if you're 30 and you got to start over? Like there's I think the guy Dyson was like 60 years old or something, right? Before he did that. Yeah,
it's funny. I'm giving this advice and now I'm like, but meanwhile, I'm like turning the crank of my property management business, slowly growing this thing.
Actually, it's a great. I want to talk to you about that property management business because I know you are trying to grow it and continue. Which one, I'd ask why? Mm-hmm. Why property management? And two, how are you planning on doing that?
Well, I mean, the reason that we're in the business is because we have to be.
Yeah.
Like we promised a bunch of investors in these buildings that we were going to own them and manage them kind of indefinitely, and that's what we're going to do. And I would like to buy more buildings and manage those too. So we kind of have to be in the management business. Once you're going to have to be in the business, what you realize pretty quickly is that it's a scale business. You want to be bigger rather than smaller for various reasons. It doesn't have the economies of scale that many businesses do. That's why a lot of people think of property management as a bad business. And one of the reasons that it is not great is that the margins do not get much better as you get bigger. It's a people business. Mm-hmm. So you just like...
Your leverage is people.
Yeah. And there's just not that much, it's not software margins or Forma or whatever. But what's good about it is a couple of things. One, recurring revenue. Two, you don't, unlike in other businesses, you don't have to negotiate for price increases. So like as the rents grow, your revenue gets pulled along with it. So there's like, you could have bad years, but like over the long term, if rents are going to grow, then your revenue is going to grow. You don't have to go back and renegotiate with your customers.
Yeah.
There's low capital intensivity. Like you don't have to go buy more tractors or open more stores or whatever. And so because of those things, because of the recurring revenue and the revenue growth and the low capital intensivity, it's relatively an easy business to manage. I mean, there's a lot of complexity, and like I'm kind of like laughing at myself when I say that because there's a lot that goes on under the hood.
Yeah.
And we screw up all the time. It's a hard business in that way.
Yeah.
But like compared to, for example, like selling consumer packaged goods on Amazon or like running a restaurant or whatever, it's just an easier business. Like you don't have to manage the balance sheet very much. Like you're not worried about working capital. You're not like, oh, I've got all this inventory that's depreciating because I bet on the wrong jackets for the summer. Or whatever. So it's like a good. We need to be in the business. It's not super hard to run, and it's synergistic with what we're doing on the principal side. So I'm very happy to continue to be in it, to be in that business. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be more and more apartment buildings in Los Angeles. We're loosening up the zoning, so there is sort of starting to be more growth. So that's nice. And so since we're going to have to be in it, as long as we can find owners who, again, want to own stuff long term and want to take care of their buildings and therefore be able to get good tenants paying market leading rents, that like sort of hangs together, and that's a nice business, and we're happy to be in it.
So it's really the perfect combination of it only adds to your scale and ability to continue what you're doing, which is also kind of vertically integrating a lot of things, which I think is really important when you think about it from just a longevity perspective, being able to control the controllables. And again, it is tough when you have politics and things outside your control.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had like 10 really good years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then it's been between COVID and the weather and all this stuff over the last couple of years has been pretty bad. But the management business, you control what you can control. There's a source of recurring revenue, so you don't we haven't had to like lay off everyone. Yeah. We don't have to go do deals we don't want to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the ballast of the organization. Mm. So while it was very hard to build the business, while we were also doing whatever, I'm very grateful that we did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's just continue to be able to provide the services you've mastered over those, 10, 20 years. And be able to share that with people who align with what you're doing. And I think you got to a place now, too, where you can, like you said, turn down people who don't fit this. And that is totally okay. And you've diversified. And like that probably feels like a really good position to be in.
It's like, look, a lot of other people have made a lot more money than I have. I think few people have I think I took very little risk. Like along the way.
Yeah.
I think I played a very low risk game, which I don't think is widely appreciated. So I think I did pretty well given how little risk I took. But yeah, it really affords like a pretty nice lifestyle. Like I'm not, there's a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people have made more money, but like I have a lot of control over my life. You know what I mean? This morning I sat down and had breakfast with like a really close friend of mine and a new guy we just met and like talked for an hour and a half about stuff that had nothing, just like interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Like totally made my day. And I can do that because of the way I set my life up.
You've set up your systems to be like that. Moses, anything else you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up? Anything worth mentioning?
Well, first I want to thank you.
Yeah,
having me on. It's been a great conversation. I feel like my brain has been drained. I hope that this conversation has communicated, particularly the young people who are watching, like how exciting this is. And it's like, it's not always fun exciting. Sometimes it's, even particularly on the principal side, like sometimes it's like terrifying exciting. But like you only get to live once. And like, what are you going to do? Like, I don't know. Anyway, whatever. People could choose whatever they want. But for me, like setting out in your little boat in this like stormy sea and like hoping to get to the, the promise on the other side is like, that's a pretty exciting way to spend one's life.
I agree. Moses, thank you very much for being on here. I appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoy. Check it out. Go check Moses out. He's on all the social medias, posts incredible content. Very useful, I think, in for whatever business you're in. Trying to grow anything, and I highly recommend you go check him out. But thank you, sir.
Taylor, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could rate us 5 stars on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. It really helps us get our name out there and helps us get fantastic people like our guests to share their insights and knowledge with you. Again, my name is Taylor Avakian. I specialize in the sale of apartment buildings in Los Angeles and Southern California, and I look forward to sharing more of these conversations with you. See you in the next one.